I'm Donovan, 32, and I thought I had finally created the perfect life for myself in Seattle, far away from my controlling parents and troubled sister Megan. My software engineering career was thriving, and my new house was my sanctuary. Then came that family dinner where my parents dropped the bomb. "Your sister's moving in. Don't make a fuss." They never asked, just decided. What they didn't expect was who would open the door when they showed up with the moving truck. Before I jump into this wild story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had family try to bulldoze your boundaries. Trust me, what happened next changed everything. Growing up in Boston with Richard and Sophia Adams as parents wasn't easy. Our brownstone in Beacon Hill looked picture perfect from the outside, but inside those walls was a different story. Dad ran his household like he ran his law firm, with iron-fisted control and zero tolerance for disobedience. Mom was subtler but equally controlling, using guilt and emotional manipulation instead of Dad's thundering voice. I was the quiet, responsible kid who got straight A's and never caused trouble. My sister Megan was 4 years younger, and somehow both the golden child and the family disaster. No matter what she did wrong, my parents found a way to excuse it. When she started skipping school at 13, it was because teachers weren't challenging her. When she got caught shoplifting at 15, it was because she was going through a phase. When she crashed Dad's car at 17, they bought her a new one 2 weeks later. Meanwhile, I worked weekends at the local bookstore to save for college because Dad said it would build character, even though he could have easily paid my tuition. Every mistake I made was a federal case, while Megan got endless second chances. Donovan, "You need to look out for your sister," became my parents' mantra. She's sensitive. She needs more support. By the time I turned 18, I had one goal: escape. I applied to colleges as far from Boston as possible, landing a partial scholarship to the University of Washington. The day I boarded that plane to Seattle was the first time I felt like I could breathe freely. College was transformative. I thrived in computer science, made real friends who liked me for me, not because of family obligation. I took summer internships at tech companies instead of going home, building my resume and my independence simultaneously. The distance helped me see just how dysfunctional my family truly was. After graduation, I landed a job at a growing tech company in Seattle. While my peers were blowing their paychecks on luxury apartments and fancy cars, I lived frugally in a small studio apartment, building my savings. I watched my retirement accounts grow and monitored the real estate market, waiting for the right opportunity. Back in Boston, Megan's adult life was becoming a predictable cycle. She'd get a job, lose it within months, move in with our parents, find a new job, get her own place, then repeat the whole process again. She cycled through relationships just as quickly. My parents kept bailing her out, paying her rent when she came up short, covering the credit card debt she racked up, and making excuses for her behavior. "She just hasn't found her calling yet," Mom would say during our monthly phone calls. "She's going through a rough patch," Dad would add, before asking if I could loan Megan money that we all knew would never be repaid. 3 years ago, I finally found my dream home. A beautiful craftsman with a view of Puget Sound. The day I signed those mortgage papers was the proudest moment of my life. I had done it entirely on my own, without a penny from my parents. I spent weekends renovating, painting walls, replacing fixtures, making it truly mine. My home became my sanctuary, a physical manifestation of the independent life I had built. I kept my visits with family to a minimum. Thanksgiving some years, a week in the summer sometimes. Each visit left me emotionally drained. watching the same dynamics play out. Megan, now 30, still acted like a teenager. My parents still enabled her. I still felt like an outsider. Last year, I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Marshall, who helped me establish healthier boundaries. Instead of sporadic, tension-filled visits, I committed to weekly Sunday phone calls with my parents. It was easier to maintain my composure during a 30-minute call than a 5-day visit. I learned to redirect conversations when they turned to Megan's problems or attempts to make me feel guilty for living so far away. "You're doing great work," Dr. Marshall told me during one session. Boundaries aren't about shutting people out. They're about defining what kind of relationship you can healthily sustain. When my parents announced they were visiting Seattle for their 40th wedding anniversary, I felt ready. I had a spare bedroom where they could stay for 3 days. I took time off work to show them around my city. I made reservations at the best restaurant in town for a celebratory dinner. I was determined to host them as an independent adult, not the obedient son they still expected me to be. I should have known it was too good to be true. The evening started pleasantly enough. Canlis Restaurant offered spectacular views of Lake Union, and I'd requested a window table for the occasion. Mom looked elegant in a navy dress, Dad distinguished in his tailored suit. I wore my best blazer, feeling confident and grown-up as I ordered a bottle of champagne. To 40 years, I toasted clinking glasses with them. "Congratulations." Mom smiled tightly. Dad nodded, taking a large swig rather than a celebratory sip. The tension was already simmering beneath the surface pleasantries. "So, how are you enjoying Seattle?" I asked, desperate to keep the conversation light. "It rains too much," Dad said bluntly. "I don't understand why anyone would choose to live here." I bit back a retort about Boston's brutal winters and forced a smile. "The summers make up for it. And the tech industry here is booming." "Speaking of your job," Mom interjected, "your father and I were thinking it might be time for you to look at opportunities back east. There must be tech companies in Boston too." Here we go again. "I'm actually up for a promotion next month," I replied. "The company's growing fast, and I'm growing with it." "Well, that's nice, but family should be a priority too," Mom said, her voice taking on that guilt-inducing tone I knew all too well. The server arrived with our appetizers, temporarily pausing the conversation. I used the opportunity to steer towards safer territory, asking about their anniversary trip plans. We made it through the main course with superficial conversation about family friends, Boston politics, and their cruise to Alaska scheduled for the following week. I started to believe we might actually have a pleasant evening. Then Dad cleared his throat as the dessert menus arrived. "Donovan, there's something we need to discuss," he said, his tone shifting to what I called his courtroom voice. Mom reached over and placed her hand on mine. Never a good sign. "It's about Megan," she said. My stomach clenched. Of course it was. "What about her?" I asked cautiously. Dad straightened his already perfect posture. "She's lost her job at the gallery, and consequently, her apartment." "Again?" I couldn't help but ask. Mom's eyes flashed with disapproval. The gallery owner was completely unreasonable. Megan was only late a few times. 12 times in 1 month, Dad corrected, surprising me. Then he added, "But the point is, she needs a fresh start." I nodded non-committally, taking a sip of water. This was the usual preamble to them asking me to loan her money. "Your sister's moving in with you," Dad announced abruptly. "Don't make a fuss about it." I choked on my water. "Excuse me? We've already purchased her plane ticket," Mom added, as if this were a minor detail. "She arrives next Tuesday." The restaurant seemed to tilt around me. "You decided this without even asking me first?" "We're not asking, Donovan. "We're telling you," Dad said firmly. "Megan needs family support right now, and you have all that extra space in your house." "That's my home," I said, struggling to keep my voice level. "I get to decide who lives there." Mom's expression hardened. "Family helps family. You have 2 spare bedrooms and live alone. Megan needs support. She's 30 years old," I countered. "She needs to take responsibility for her life, not move across the country to start the same cycle again." "This attitude is exactly why we didn't ask you beforehand," Dad snapped. "We knew you'd react selfishly." The word hit like a slap. Selfish. The ultimate accusation in my family's moral code. "It's not selfish to have boundaries," I said. Dr. Marshall's words coming through my lips. "Megan needs professional help, not another enabler." "How dare you?" Mom hissed. "After everything we've done for you, what exactly have you done for me?" The words escaped before I could stop them. I put myself through college. I built my career. I bought my house. All without help from either of you. Dad's face reddened dangerously. "We raised you. We fed and clothed you. We provided a stable home. The bare minimum required by law," I muttered. "I won't have this discussion in public," Dad declared, signaling for the check. "The arrangements are already made. Megan will be arriving Tuesday. We expect you to pick her up at the airport and help her get settled." The server appeared with the check. I reached for it, but Dad snatched it first, slapping his credit card down without looking at the total. "You can't just decide this for me," I said, struggling to keep my composure. "We already have," Mom replied coldly. "It's time you stepped up for this family instead of only thinking about yourself." The ride back to my house was silent and suffocating. My parents stared out the windows, radiating disapproval. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, fighting back the words that threatened to explode from me. That night, lying awake in my bedroom while my parents slept down the hall, I realized I had reached a breaking point. Something had to change. I couldn't continue this pattern anymore. I just didn't know yet what I was going to do about it. Sleep evaded me that night. I tossed and turned, replaying the dinner conversation in my head, thinking of all the things I should have said. By morning, I was exhausted but clear on one thing. I needed advice. I texted my best friend Tyler while my parents were still asleep. "Emergency. Need to talk. Coffee at noon?" After a tense breakfast where we all pretended nothing had happened, I dropped my parents off at Pike Place Market for some sightseeing, promising to pick them up in a few hours. Tyler was waiting at our favorite coffee shop when I arrived. One look at my face told him everything. "Whoa, you look like hell," he said as I collapsed into the chair across from him. "Family visit not going well?" I spilled the whole story, from the anniversary dinner ambush to the declaration that Megan would be arriving in 4 days. "And they just decided this? Without asking you?" Tyler looked incredulous. "Welcome to the Addams family dynamic," I said bitterly. "They've always treated my life as an extension of theirs. My house is their house. My resources are family resources." Tyler shook his head. "So what are you going to do?" That was the million-dollar question. "I don't know. If I say no, I'm the bad guy who abandoned his sister. If I say yes, I'm inviting chaos into my life and enabling her behavior. What would happen if you just said no?" I laughed humorlessly. World War III. My parents would never forgive me. "And if you say yes?" I pictured Megan in my house, her clothes strewn everywhere, strangers coming and going at all hours, the inevitable drama when she lost yet another job. I imagined her still there a year later, 2 years, indefinitely. My sanctuary destroyed. I'd be miserable, I admitted. and it wouldn't even help Megan in the long run. Tyler sipped his coffee thoughtfully. So either way, there's a cost. The question is, which cost can you live with? It was brutally simple when framed that way. Could I live with my parents' disapproval and anger? It would be painful but survivable. Could I live with surrendering my home and peace of mind to Megan's chaos? That felt like a slow death. I need to talk to Dr. Marshall, I said finally. Fortunately, my therapist had an opening that afternoon. I picked up my parents, endured a few more hours of strained sightseeing, then dropped them at a waterfront restaurant for an early dinner, claiming a work emergency. Dr. Marshall's office had always felt like a safe space, but today even the familiar blue walls and comfortable couch couldn't calm my anxiety. "They're bulldozing over your boundaries," she said after I recounted the situation. "How does that make you feel?" "Angry," I admitted. "And guilty for feeling angry and trapped. The guilt is programmed into you," she pointed out. "It's how they've controlled you all these years. But you're not trapped, Donovan. You're an independent adult with choices. What choice do I have? If I say no, I'm the villain in their narrative. Yes, but you don't have to accept their narrative." I sat with that for a moment. "So you think I should refuse?" Dr. Marshall chose her words carefully. "I can't tell you what to do, but I can ask you to consider what message you send by agreeing to this arrangement. To your parents, it says your boundaries don't matter. To Megan, it says she doesn't need to take responsibility for her actions because someone will always rescue her." The truth of it hit me like a physical blow. So by saying yes, I'm actually hurting all of us in the long run. She nodded. "Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for someone is to stop protecting them from the natural consequences of their choices." That evening, I searched online for information about codependency and enabling behavior. Article after article described my family dynamics with unsettling accuracy. One passage in particular stood out. Enabling behavior, while often done out of love, keeps the dysfunctional cycle intact. Breaking the cycle requires someone to change their role in the system, which inevitably creates resistance from others who benefit from the status quo. I stayed up late reading, finding strength in stories of others who had established healthy boundaries with family. By morning, I knew what I had to do. The realization brought both clarity and dread. Over breakfast, I told my parents I needed to discuss the situation with Megan. "There's nothing to discuss," Dad said dismissively. "It's already decided." "Nevertheless, I'm going to call her," I replied, my voice steady, despite my racing heart. I stepped onto the back porch and dialed Megan's number. She answered on the fourth ring. "Hey, big brother," she said, her voice artificially bright. "Did Mom and Dad tell you the good news?" "We're going to be roomies." "Megan, we need to talk about this," I began. "This wasn't a joint decision. I didn't agree to it." "Oh." Her tone shifted instantly. "So you're saying you don't want to help me? After everything I've been through?" The familiar guilt trip made something harden inside me. "What exactly have you been through, Megan?" "You lost a job because you were repeatedly late. That's not a tragedy. It's a consequence." Wow. Just wow. I knew you were selfish, but this is cold, even for you. "It's not selfish to have boundaries," I repeated my new mantra. "I love you, but I can't let you move in with me." "Fine," she spat. "Stay on your high horse. I don't need your charity anyway." She hung up. I stared at the phone, feeling both terrible and oddly relieved. Then I went back inside to face my parents. The next 2 days were excruciating. Mom alternated between icy silence and tearful accusations. Dad threatened to cut me from their will, as if that would change my mind. They called relatives to tell them how I had abandoned poor Megan in her time of need. My Aunt Patrice called to berate me. My Uncle Carl texted to express his disappointment. Through it all, I held firm, reminding myself that their reactions only confirmed how necessary this boundary was. The night before my parents were scheduled to leave, Mom tried a different approach. "We raised you better than this," she said quietly as we sat in my living room. "Family takes care of family." "I agree," I replied. "But taking care means doing what's truly best for someone, not what's easiest. And you think abandoning your sister is what's best?" Dad interjected. "I'm not abandoning her. I'm refusing to enable her. There's a difference." "You've become so cold since moving here," Mom said, shaking her head. "I don't even recognize you anymore." Perhaps that was true. Perhaps the real me had been buried under years of compliance and guilt. Perhaps they never knew the real me at all. The next morning, I drove my parents to the airport in silence. As they prepared to go through security, Mom hugged me stiffly. "We're very disappointed in you," she said. "I know," I replied. "I'm sorry you feel that way." Dad didn't hug me at all, just nodded curtly and walked away. I should have felt relieved when they left, but instead, I felt hollow. I went straight to Tyler's apartment, needing company. "They're gone," I said when he opened the door. "But they're planning to send Megan anyway. They said she'll just show up on Tuesday, and I'll be too decent to turn her away." Tyler's eyes widened. "Would you turn her away?" I honestly didn't know. The thought of Megan standing on my doorstep with her luggage was my worst nightmare. Despite my newfound resolve, face-to-face confrontation had never been my strong suit. "I need a plan," I said finally. "Something that makes it impossible for her to move in, so I don't have to be the bad guy who turns away his homeless sister." That's when the idea began to take shape. A plan so audacious, it just might work. The first call was the hardest. With trembling fingers, I dialed my father's cell phone the morning after they returned to Boston. He answered on the first ring. "Donovan," he said, his voice clipped. "I assume you're calling to apologize and tell us you've reconsidered." "Actually, no," I replied, my heart pounding but my voice steady. "I'm calling to make my position absolutely clear. Megan cannot move in with me. I won't be picking her up from the airport. My home is not available to her." The explosion was immediate and volcanic. Dad's voice rose to a shout that forced me to hold the phone away from my ear. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? By abandoning your sister when she needs you most? What kind of man have you become?" I waited for the tirade to subside before speaking again. "I'm sorry you're upset, but my decision is final. If Megan comes to Seattle, she'll need to make other arrangements. Don't you dare put this on us," he snarled. "This is your failure. As a brother, as a son, as a decent human being." Each accusation stung, but I held my ground. "I have to go now. I've said what I needed to say. If you hang up this phone, Donovan, there will be consequences, severe consequences." The old threat, the one that had kept me in line throughout my childhood. But I wasn't a child anymore. "Goodbye, Dad. I love you, but I won't be changing my mind." I ended the call and immediately turned off my phone, knowing it would soon be bombarded. Instead of checking messages, I went for a long run along the waterfront, letting the rhythm of my feet against the pavement clear my head. When I returned home and finally turned my phone back on, it exploded with notifications. 17 missed calls from my parents, 32 text messages from family members, each more accusatory than the last, 3 voicemails from Megan, starting with tearful pleading and escalating to vicious attacks on my character. "You've always been jealous of me," she spat in the final message. "You've always resented that Mom and Dad love me more. Well, guess what? They do. Everyone does. Because you're cold and selfish and incapable of real love." Her words cut deep because they tapped into my most vulnerable insecurities. Had I always been jealous? Was I incapable of love? Was establishing boundaries actually just selfishness in disguise? I sank onto my couch, suddenly overwhelmed by doubt. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was the problem, not them. The weight of family expectation pressed down on me until I could barely breathe. In desperation, I called Tyler. "They all hate me," I said when he answered. "My entire family thinks I'm a monster." "You're not a monster," Tyler replied firmly. "You're just the first person in your family to say no to the dysfunction. That makes you the enemy because you're threatening the system they all depend on." His words helped, but the bombardment continued. Aunt Patrice called to tell me my grandmother would be ashamed of me. Uncle Carl suggested I might need psychological help for my pathological selfishness. Cousins I barely spoke to sent messages expressing their shock at my cruelty. The next day, my mother called. "We've tried to be understanding," she said, her voice eerily calm. "We've tried to give you time to reconsider, but you've left us no choice. Your father and I will be accompanying Megan to Seattle. We've already booked our flights." My blood ran cold. "Mom, that won't change anything. I've made my decision." "We'll see about that," she replied before hanging up. Panic seized me. The thought of my parents and Megan showing up at my door, creating a scene in front of my neighbors, possibly refusing to leave. It was unbearable. I called Dr. Marshall and scheduled an emergency session. "They're coming anyway," I told her, pacing her office. "They think they can force me to give in if they confront me in person." "What do you think will happen if they do show up?" she asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "I've never stood up to them face to face before. I'm afraid I'll cave under the pressure." "That's a valid concern," she acknowledged. "Family patterns are powerful, especially when we're physically in their presence. So what do I do?" "You have options. You could stay with a friend that day. You could have someone else be there with you for support. You could even temporarily rent a room to someone, making it legitimately unavailable." The last suggestion caught my attention. Rent a room? Sometimes a physical reality is harder to argue with than an emotional boundary, she explained. It's one thing to say, "I don't want Megan to move in," and another to say, "Someone else already lives here." The seed of an idea that had started with Tyler began to grow. What if I did have a roommate? Not permanently, but just long enough to make it impossible for Megan to move in. I left the session with renewed determination and a plan beginning to take shape. That evening, I reached out to friends who might be willing to pose as my roommate for a few days. Several offered, but logistics proved challenging. Some lived too far away. Others couldn't get time off work on such short notice. Meanwhile, the onslaught from my family intensified. My father sent an email outlining all the ways I had disappointed them throughout my life, culminating with this ultimate betrayal. Megan texted that she had already given notice at her apartment and would be homeless if I didn't take her in. My mother called my company's HR department, claiming a family emergency that required my immediate attention. The stress began taking a physical toll. I developed insomnia, lying awake worrying about the impending confrontation. My appetite disappeared. I had trouble concentrating at work. During one particularly desperate moment, I even considered giving in, just to make the pressure stop. But then, I remembered Dr. Marshall's words. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for someone is to stop protecting them from the natural consequences of their choices. Giving in now wouldn't just hurt me. It would hurt Megan too, trapping her in the same destructive cycle. I had to stay strong, for both our sakes. With my family set to arrive in just 3 days, I was running out of time to implement my plan. None of my friends could commit to moving in temporarily on such short notice. I needed another solution, and fast. That's when fate intervened in the most unexpected way. The first time I noticed my new neighbor was 2 weeks after she moved in. I was retrieving my mail when a moving box tumbled from her arms as she struggled up the front steps of the adjacent townhouse. "Need a hand?" I called, jogging over to help. "Thanks," she said, blowing a strand of dark hair from her face. "I swear this is the last box. At least that's what I've been telling myself for the past week." I laughed, picking up the fallen box. "I'm Donovan. By the way, I live next door." "Jasmine," she replied with a warm smile. "Nice to finally meet a neighbor." Over the next few weeks, our paths crossed occasionally. We exchanged pleasantries about the weather, recommended local restaurants to each other, and gradually moved from being neighbors to becoming friendly acquaintances. I learned she was a graphic designer who worked remotely for clients across the country. She discovered I was a software engineer who enjoyed hiking on weekends. The day after my parents announced their plan to accompany Megan to Seattle, I ran into Jasmine at the local coffee shop. She took one look at my face and frowned. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said. "Everything okay?" Under normal circumstances, I would have said yes and moved on. But I was emotionally exhausted from the family drama and desperate for any sympathetic ear. "Family trouble," I admitted. "It's complicated. I've got time," she said, gesturing to an empty table. And I'm an excellent listener. Something about her open expression made me trust her. Before I knew it, I was telling her the whole sordid story. My controlling parents, my troubled sister, the demand that I take Megan in, my refusal, and now their plan to show up anyway. "They're arriving Tuesday with a moving truck," I concluded. "And I have no idea how to handle it." Jasmine listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly incredulous. "That's completely outrageous," she said when I finished. "They can't just decide who lives in your house. They've been deciding things for me my whole life," I sighed. "Standing up to them in person is challenging." She nodded thoughtfully. "I understand that better than you might think. My mother was similar. Always pushing. Always controlling. When I was 24, she decided I should marry my then boyfriend. When I refused, she threatened to disown me. "What did you do?" "I called her bluff," Jasmine said simply. "It was terrifying. And yes, she did cut off contact for almost 2 years. But eventually, she came around. Now we have a relationship with actual boundaries, and it's so much healthier." Her story gave me hope. My therapist suggested I could prevent Megan from moving in by already having someone in the spare room. But I can't find anyone able to pose as my roommate on such short notice. Jasmine was quiet for a moment, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. Then she looked up with determination in her eyes. "What if I did it?" I blinked in surprise. "You? Why not? My lease is month to month, and I work from home. I could stay in your guest room for a few days, just until your family leaves. It would give you a legitimate reason why Megan can't move in." The offer was so unexpected and perfect that I was momentarily speechless. "That's incredibly generous," I finally managed. But I couldn't ask you to get involved in my family drama. You didn't ask. I offered, she pointed out. Besides, I've been where you are. Someone helped me stand up to my mother when I couldn't do it alone. Consider this me paying it forward. We spent the next hour working out the details. Jasmine would bring enough belongings to make it look like she truly lived there. We'd create a simple rental agreement that predated my parents' announcement. She would stay for 3 days, through the confrontation and immediate aftermath. Just to be clear, she added, this is a temporary arrangement solely to help you establish a boundary with your family. I'll be your pretend roommate. Nothing more. Absolutely, I agreed, relieved that she had addressed the potential awkwardness directly. And I'll compensate you for your time. Of course. She waved this off. Just buy me dinner, and we'll call it even. Though I do have one condition. What's that? You have to promise to actually go through with this. No backing down at the last minute. No giving in to the guilt trips. If I'm putting myself in the middle of a family showdown, I want it to be worth it. I extended my hand. Deal. The next few days were a flurry of activity. Jasmine moved some clothes, books, and personal items into my guest bedroom. We rearranged the living room slightly, adding some of her artwork to the walls and her throw pillows to the couch. She brought her laptop and set up a workstation in the corner of the dining room. We also established ground rules for our temporary cohabitation. She would use the guest bathroom exclusively. We would share kitchen duties, but eat meals separately. And most importantly, we would respect each other's privacy. I know this is weird, she acknowledged as we finished setting up her room. But it's kind of exciting too. Like we're pulling off some elaborate heist. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Oceans 2. The roommate caper. The night before my family was due to arrive, we sat in my living room reviewing our plan one last time. Remember, Jasmine said, the key is to be calm but firm. Don't get drawn into emotional arguments. Just keep repeating the simple fact. You have a roommate now, so there's no space for Megan. What if they ask how long you've lived here? We signed the rental agreement 2 months ago, she recited. I moved most of my things in gradually over the past few weeks, and if they demand to see the agreement, she patted her laptop. Already created and backdated, ready to be printed if necessary. I nodded, impressed by her thoroughness. I still can't believe you're doing this for me, Jasmine smiled. Sometimes we need someone in our corner when we're learning to stand up for ourselves. You do the same for someone else. That night, as I lay in bed trying to calm my racing thoughts, I realized something surprising. For the first time since this ordeal began, I wasn't dreading the confrontation. With Jasmine's help, I felt prepared. More than that, I felt justified in my stance. Tomorrow would be difficult, but I was finally ready to face my family on my own terms. Tuesday morning dawned bright and clear, a rarity for Seattle in the fall. Under different circumstances, it would have been a perfect day. Instead, it felt like the calm before the storm. Jasmine and I had our plan in place. She would be working from home all day, a normal part of her routine as a remote graphic designer. I, however, would not be home when my family first arrived. This was intentional. We wanted them to encounter Jasmine first, without me there, to immediately absorb their anger and manipulation. Are you sure you're comfortable with this? I asked Jasmine over breakfast. They can be pretty intense. She looked calm as she sipped her coffee. Trust me. After dealing with my mother's theatrics for 29 years, I can handle this. Besides, what's the worst they can do? Yell at a stranger? That would just make them look worse. Her confidence was reassuring. We reviewed our timeline once more. My parents' flight was scheduled to land at 11:30 a.m. Allowing for baggage claim and the drive from the airport, they would likely arrive at my house around 1 p.m. I would leave at noon and go to a nearby coffee shop where I could monitor the situation via my home security camera. Once they had been there for about 15 minutes, I would return home to support Jasmine and face my family together. Remember, Jasmine said as I prepared to leave, don't rush back at the first sign of conflict. Give them time to process the initial shock. At 12:15 p.m., I was settled at a corner table in the coffee shop, laptop open, security app ready. My phone buzzed with a text from Megan. Landed. See you soon. Brother dearest. The passive-aggressive tone set my teeth on edge, but I didn't respond. At 12:58 p.m., my security camera alerted me to movement on my front porch. Right on schedule, a taxi pulled up in front of my house. My parents emerged first, looking travel-worn but determined. Megan followed, her expression a mixture of entitlement and anxiety. A rental moving truck pulled up behind them. My stomach clenched at the sight they truly had planned to move Megan in without my consent. Dad led the way to my front door and rang the bell firmly. Through the camera's microphone, I heard Jasmine's footsteps approaching. The door opened. Yes? Jasmine's voice was polite, but puzzled. Dad blinked in confusion. We're here to see Donovan Adams. Oh, Donovan's not home right now, Jasmine replied. Can I help you? Mom stepped forward, peering past Jasmine into my house. Who are you? I'm Jasmine Chen, Donovan's roommate. And you are? The stunned silence that followed was almost comical. My parents exchanged bewildered glances. Megan's mouth actually fell open. Roommate? Dad finally sputtered. Donovan doesn't have a roommate. Jasmine leaned casually against the doorframe. I've been living here for 2 months now, and you still haven't told me who you are. Mom drew herself up, indignation radiating from every pore. We are Richard and Sophia Adams, Donovan's parents. This is his sister, Megan. And Donovan most certainly does not have a roommate. Well, that's news to me, Jasmine said with a slight laugh. And probably news to Donovan too, considering I signed a 1-year lease agreement with him in August. Dad's face reddened dangerously. This is absurd. Let us in immediately. We need to speak with our son. As I said, he's not home right now, Jasmine repeated calmly. And I'm afraid I can't let strangers into our home without his permission, even if you say you're his family. We don't need permission to enter our son's house, Mom declared, attempting to step past Jasmine. Jasmine didn't budge. Actually, you do. This is private property, and neither of you lives here. Megan, who had been silently watching this exchange, suddenly burst into tears. This is all a trick, she wailed. Donovan promised I could move in with him. He's my brother. I winced at the blatant lie, but Jasmine didn't falter. I'm sorry, but that's not possible, she said firmly. Both spare bedrooms are occupied. I have the one upstairs, and my home office is in the other. This is outrageous, Dad thundered. Where is Donovan? I demand to speak with him immediately. I texted him that you're here, Jasmine said. He should be home soon. In the meantime, you're welcome to wait on the porch, but I cannot allow you inside without his permission. As my family continued to argue with Jasmine, I gathered my things and headed back to the house. Part of me wanted to stay safely away, but I had promised both Jasmine and myself that I would see this through. I arrived to find a full-blown scene unfolding on my front lawn. My father was shouting at Jasmine. who remained calm, but immovable in the doorway. My mother had her arm around a sobbing Megan. A few neighbors had come out to watch the commotion. "What's going on here?" I asked, approaching the group. All heads swiveled toward me. Dad immediately strode over, his face contorted with rage. "What kind of game are you playing?" he demanded. "Who is this woman claiming to be your roommate?" I moved to stand beside Jasmine in the doorway. "This is Jasmine. She moved in 2 months ago," which I would have mentioned if anyone had bothered to ask me before deciding Megan would live here. "You're lying," Mom said, her voice trembling with anger. "You're making this up to avoid helping your sister." "I'm not lying," I replied steadily. "Jasmine and I have a signed rental agreement. There's no room for Megan here." Megan pushed past our parents to confront me directly. "You promised," she shouted, tears streaming down her face. "You said I could stay with you until I got back on my feet." "I never promised that," I said firmly. "In fact, I explicitly told you that you couldn't move in when you called last week. So you're choosing a stranger over your own blood?" Dad demanded. "I'm honoring a legal agreement I made with my roommate," I corrected him, "and I'm maintaining a boundary I clearly communicated to all of you." Mom turned to Jasmine, her expression suddenly sickeningly sweet. "Surely we can work something out. Megan only needs a place temporarily. Perhaps you could stay with a friend for a few weeks?" Jasmine shook her head. "I'm afraid that's not possible. I work from home and need my space. Besides, we have a binding lease agreement." Dad snorted. "Lease agreement. Let's see this supposed document." Jasmine disappeared inside momentarily, returning with the agreement we had prepared. Dad snatched it from her hands, scanning it suspiciously. "This could easily be faked," he declared. "It's not," I said. "But even if there were no formal agreement, the fact remains that this is my house, and I decide who lives in it. I've made my decision clear multiple times, yet you chose to ignore it and show up anyway. Because we knew you would do the right thing when faced with the reality of your sister's situation," Mom insisted. I looked at Megan, who was now sitting on a suitcase, her makeup streaked with tears. The sight tugged at my heart, but I reminded myself that this was a crisis of her own making, and one she had experienced many times before. "Megan," I said gently, "I'm sorry you're in this situation, but moving in with me isn't the solution. You need to build an independent life, not just change locations and continue the same patterns." "How dare you lecture her?" Dad growled. "After pulling this stunt." "This isn't a stunt," I replied. "This is me setting a boundary and sticking to it. I told you all repeatedly that Megan couldn't move in with me. You chose not to listen. So what exactly do you expect us to do now?" Mom demanded. "Your sister has nowhere to go." "That's not true," I pointed out. "She could go back to Boston with you. Or she could use the money you spent on this moving truck to get a short-term rental while she looks for work here in Seattle, if she's serious about relocating." Dad threw up his hands in disgust. "I don't recognize the man you've become. The son we raised would never turn his back on family." "The son you raised," I said quietly, "was taught that his needs and boundaries didn't matter. I've unlearned that lesson, and I'm better for it." A tense silence fell over the group. For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker across my father's face. My mother looked between Jasmine and me, as if searching for cracks in our story. Megan continued to sob quietly. Finally, Dad spoke. "This discussion isn't over. We'll get a hotel for tonight, and we'll talk again tomorrow, when everyone has calmed down." It wasn't the resolution I had hoped for, but it was progress. They were leaving, at least temporarily. "That seems reasonable," I conceded. I'm happy to meet with you tomorrow to discuss Megan's options that don't involve her moving in with me. Mom helped Megan to her feet. Come on, sweetheart. We'll figure this out. As they walked back to the taxi, Dad turned to deliver one final parting shot. I hope you're proud of yourself, Donovan. I hope this display of selfishness was worth destroying your family. The words stung, but I stood my ground. This isn't about selfishness, Dad. It's about health, mine and Megan's. He shook his head in disgust and joined my mother and sister in the taxi. The driver of the moving truck looked confused. What about the truck, sir? He called to my father. Keep it for now, Dad replied. We'll sort it out tomorrow. As the taxi pulled away, I felt a curious mixture of emotions. Guilt and grief. Yes, but also relief and an unexpected sense of pride. I had held my boundary despite enormous pressure. I had spoken my truth calmly and clearly. Jasmine squeezed my arm. You did it, she said softly. That was incredibly brave. We went inside, closing the door on the curious neighbors and the idling moving truck. For the first time in days, I took a deep breath that didn't catch in my chest. Thank you, I said to Jasmine. I couldn't have done this without you. Yes, you could have, she replied with a smile. But I'm glad you didn't have to. The battle wasn't over, I knew. Tomorrow would bring more confrontation, more guilt trips, more attempts to wear me down. But something fundamental had shifted. I had proven to myself that I could stand firm. And perhaps, just perhaps, I had shown my family that the old dynamics no longer worked. It was a beginning. The days following the confrontation were difficult but transformative. As promised, my parents requested another meeting the next day. This time, I suggested a neutral location, a quiet restaurant near their hotel. Jasmine offered to come along for moral support, but I declined. This is something I need to handle myself, I told her. But thank you for everything you've already done. She nodded understanding. You've got this. Just remember, you're not the bad guy here. At the restaurant, my parents were subdued but still clearly angry. Megan refused to make eye contact. I had prepared for more emotional warfare, but instead, my father opened with a business proposition. We've been discussing options, he said stiffly. We're prepared to pay 3 months' rent on an apartment for Megan here in Seattle. After that, she'll need to support herself. I blinked in surprise. This was the first time they had ever proposed a solution that didn't involve me taking responsibility for my sister. That sounds reasonable, I said cautiously. Is that something you want, Megan? She shrugged without looking up. I guess there are conditions, Mom added quickly. You will help her find an apartment. You will check in on her regularly. You will be available if she needs assistance. The old controlling impulse was still there, but I recognized the concession they were making. This was as close to meeting me halfway as they had ever come. I can help Megan find a place and get oriented to the city, I agreed. But I won't be her caretaker or financial safety net. Dad's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Fine. The rental truck was returned. My parents extended their hotel stay and helped Megan secure a small studio apartment in a decent neighborhood. I provided recommendations for grocery stores, public transportation, and potential job opportunities. Throughout this process, my family remained distant and formal with me. The hurt and anger simmered just beneath the surface of every interaction. When they finally returned to Boston a week later, there was no warm embrace at the airport. Just stiff nods, and my mother's parting words. I hope someday you'll understand what family truly means. The estrangement was painful, but also clarifying. For the first time, I could see the unhealthy patterns that had defined our relationship without being pulled back into them. Dr. Marshall helped me navigate the complex emotions, the guilt that still surfaced occasionally, the grief for the loving family I had never really had, the relief of finally being free from their control. Estrangement isn't always a bad thing, she told me, during a particularly difficult session. Sometimes it's the breathing room everyone needs to reassess and potentially rebuild on healthier terms. Meanwhile, Megan struggled with her newfound independence. Within the first month, she called me in tears because she couldn't pay her electric bill. I listened sympathetically, but didn't offer money. Have you looked into payment assistance programs? I asked instead. Or maybe a temporary part-time job while you're job hunting in your field. She hung up on me. The old Donovan would have called back immediately, apologizing and offering to help. The new Donovan let her sit with the natural consequences of her choices. To my surprise, she figured it out on her own. A week later, she texted that she had found a weekend job at a coffee shop to supplement her unemployment benefits while she continued searching for a position in her field. It was a small step, but a significant one. For perhaps the first time in her adult life, Megan had solved a problem without being rescued. Our parents were less adaptable. They called less frequently, and when they did, the conversations were strained. Dad spoke about neutral topics like sports and weather, avoiding any mention of the rift between us. Mom alternated between cold formality and pointed questions about whether I was checking on your sister like you promised. Christmas approached, and the question of a family gathering loomed. Dr. Marshall helped me prepare for the decision. What do you need this holiday season? She asked. Not what your family expects or what you've always done, but what would truly support your well-being right now. After careful consideration, I decided not to travel to Boston. Instead, I invited Megan to spend the holiday with me in Seattle if she wished. To my surprise, she accepted. I can't face Mom and Dad alone right now, she admitted over the phone. They're driving me crazy with their constant check-ins and advice. I laughed, a genuine moment of sibling connection. Welcome to my entire life. Christmas with just Megan was awkward at first, but gradually relaxed into something resembling a normal sibling relationship. Without our parents' presence reinforcing the golden child, divided by scapegoat dynamic, we found ways to connect as adults. You seem different, she observed as we washed dishes after Christmas dinner. Stronger somehow. I am different, I agreed. Setting boundaries will do that. She was quiet for a moment. I was really angry when you wouldn't let me move in. I thought you were being cruel. I know you did, but now I'm not so sure. She handed me a plate to dry. This is the longest I've ever supported myself without running home to Mom and Dad. It's hard, but it also feels, I don't know, real. It was the most insightful thing I'd ever heard from my sister, a glimmer of self-awareness I hadn't known she possessed. In January, Megan found a job at an art supply store. It wasn't the gallery position she'd wanted, but it was related to her interests and offered employee discounts on art materials. She began painting again in her free time, something she had loved in high school but abandoned during her turbulent 20s. The manager said they might display some of my work in the store. She told me during one of our now regular Sunday coffee meetings. Her voice contained something I'd rarely heard from her: genuine pride. Meanwhile, Jasmine and I had developed a real friendship following our fake roommate arrangement. We discovered shared interests in hiking, independent films, and trying new restaurants. She introduced me to her friends. I introduced her to mine. Our social circles began to merge. In March, I received a surprise call from my father. "Your mother and I have been talking," he said without preamble. "We think it might be beneficial for the family to try counseling together." I nearly dropped the phone in shock. "Family counseling? A neutral third party might help us communicate better," he continued stiffly. "If you're amenable." We found a therapist who does remote sessions. It wasn't an apology, but from my father, it was the equivalent of moving mountains. "I think that's an excellent idea," I said carefully. "I'd be willing to participate." Our first session was predictably tense. Mom cried. Dad retreated into formal legalese. Megan fidgeted uncomfortably on her section of the four-way video call, but we all showed up. And that itself was progress. The therapist, Dr. Benson, was skilled at navigating family dynamics. She established clear guidelines for communication and gently but firmly redirected when old patterns emerged. "What I'm hearing," she said during our third session, "is that this family has operated on an unspoken rule that Megan's needs supersede Donovan's, and parents' decisions supersede adult children's autonomy. Does that feel accurate?" Dad started to object, then stopped, considering. "I suppose we have certain expectations about family responsibility," he admitted reluctantly. "And about parental authority," Mom added. "We raised our children to respect their elders. Respect should be mutual," Dr. Benson pointed out. Adults respecting adults, regardless of their relationship. It was a fundamental shift in perspective that would take time to fully integrate. But session by session, we began to establish new patterns of interaction. I learned to express my needs without defensiveness. My parents practiced asking instead of demanding. Megan started to recognize how her dependency had limited her growth. By summer, Megan had been promoted to assistant manager at the art store. 3 of her paintings were displayed in the shop, and 1 had sold. She'd made friends at work and joined a local art collective. When our parents offered to pay for her to fly home for their anniversary, she declined. "I'm saving for a better apartment," she explained during family therapy. "And I have a show coming up with the collective." The pride in her voice was unmistakable. And for once, it came from actual accomplishment rather than our parents' favoritism. In August, almost exactly a year after the confrontation on my doorstep, I invited my parents to visit Seattle again. It was a test for all of us. They accepted with cautious enthusiasm. This visit was markedly different from the last. They stayed in a hotel without complaint. They asked before making plans. When they met Jasmine, now a close friend and still neighbor, they were polite and engaged. "Your friend seems lovely," Mom commented after dinner one evening. "She is," I agreed. "She helped me through a difficult time." Mom was quiet for a moment. "I'm beginning to understand that what seemed like rejection to us was actually self-preservation for you. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was an acknowledgement, and that was enough for now." On their last evening in Seattle, we had dinner at Megan's apartment. She had prepared the meal herself, a simple but thoughtfully presented pasta dish. Her place was small but neat, decorated with her own artwork and plants thriving on the windowsill. "I'm proud of you, Megan," Dad said as we ate. "You've built a good life here." "Thanks," she replied, a blush of pleasure coloring her cheeks. "It's the first time I've felt like I'm standing on my own 2 feet." I caught her eye across the table, and we shared a moment of silent understanding. We had both found our footing in our own ways. Later that night, walking back to my car alone, I reflected on the journey of the past year. The pain had been necessary, a breaking of old bonds to allow new, healthier ones to form. By refusing to continue our family's dysfunctional patterns, I had inadvertently created space for everyone to grow. True love, I realized, isn't about endless sacrifice or erasing your own needs. It's about respecting each person's journey enough to let them face their own challenges. Sometimes the greatest act of love is simply to stand firm in your truth and trust that others are strong enough to face theirs. The estrangement had been painful, the reconciliation slow and imperfect. But we were all more authentic now, more truly ourselves, than we had ever been within the old family system. And that made every difficult moment worthwhile. Have you ever had to set a difficult boundary with someone you care about? What was the hardest part about standing your ground? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to prioritize their own well-being. Thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply to honor your own needs. Take care of yourselves out there.